Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirsty Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts.
Welcome back to The World Awaits. How are you all?
Hi, everyone.
This week, Belle and I were fortunate enough to be invited to have a sneak peek of celebrity chef Luke Mangan's new restaurant. So I ran a story on it for Carry On, so scoot on over to carryon.com.au to have a read. And it's a new French bistro called Bistro Bisou, and it's near the Southern Cross end of town. So for those who know Melbourne, they'll know exactly where that is. And some may not know that it's actually his first restaurant in Melbourne in more than a decade, and he's a Melbourne boy too.
That was quite interesting, wasn't it? He really felt like it was a bit of a homecoming. So the restaurant is in Hotel Indigo on Flinders, and Mangan told us that he's not really trying to reinvent the wheel, but rather it's just classic, modern, great French food. And it really was. It was absolutely amazing. Great classics and a wine list to match with a very, very martini-heavy cocktail list. In fact, there were eight martinis on that list, weren't there? So if you're a martini drinker, I would get on down. I would also sell my soul for the chicken liver parfait. Oh, it was divine. And the dry aged ribeye, which was cooked over a charcoal and ironwood open fire in the open kitchen. So it was lovely and toasty on a winter's night, wasn't it? What did you like best, Kirsty?
Yes, I loved what I did. I loved watching those. I love watching chefs cook, especially when there's a whole lot of fire going on. It's
Yeah.
really nice to have that open kitchen concept. I'm going to go with the lobster thermidor with herbs and burnt lemon. I can never overlook lobster. I must adore it. But I have to say that apple tarte tatin, which is made with apple soaked in French liqueur, Calvados, was just divine. And I'm not really a dessert
Divine.
person, so that is saying something.
It was so good. I think the whole table felt that it was hoovered, even after we'd done an enormous dinner. They were just like hoovered off the table. So while this is Luke's first restaurant in Melbourne for over a decade, he has several in Sydney, including one at the Kimpton Margot in the centre of the city. And he has a restaurant. He had one in the pylons of
Yes, he does.
Sydney Harbour
Mm.
Bridge. Yeah. He also has a restaurant on the good ship, the P&O Explorer. And that, my friends, is the perfect segue to our topic this week, which is all about cruise. See what we did there, and why cruising is proving so huge. So we're going to answer all your burning questions, like how much does a world cruise actually cost? Why would I even want to go on one? And why you can now stay overnight in some places when we've all been told previously that port fees prevent ships from doing so. So that means sleeping on land as opposed to on the ship every night.
Mm. So first things first, cruise is undoubtedly a growing trend, and the 2024 report by the Cruise Industry Association shows the growing interest in cruise, including how the number of people new to cruise is increasing. So 27% of cruisers over the past 2 years have been cruising for the very first time, and more than 30% of families are traveling by cruise ship. Wow, that's quite a lot, 30%. And there's been more than 70% rise in passengers in expedition and exploration trips from 2019 to 2023.
A survey from the Tourism and Transport Forum Australia recently found that 1 in 4 Australians will go on a cruise this year, with millennials and Gen Z passengers pushing that increased demand. In fact, 35% of Australians, according to this survey, 35% of Australians under 35 are planning to cruise in 2024. So one of the big changes in that in recent years is where you sleep. So instead of staying on board for the entire trip, they're promoting overnight stays in the port cities or towns you can call into. Historically, ships only pull in for a couple of hours, otherwise they're facing enormous port fees. So we put the question to Silversea's APAC Managing Director Adam Redwanski, who says that while port fees are a standard part of operations, Silverseas generally absorbs these costs to maintain what it says is a premium travel experience. And he says because overnight stays are a significant part of its luxury offering, it covers these costs. So while some cruisers leave and come back to manage those fees, it chooses to stay and absorb those costs.
Yeah, and this is all important because historically, those overnight stays in port haven't really been possible. So most people go on cruises and you just can only go out for, say, a day, which doesn't really give you a really good chance to explore a place in a city or a village or a port. So the fact that you can actually stay overnight means you actually get a completely different experience. So ultra luxury liner Regent says it also does the same. So Vice President of APAC, Lisa Pyle, told us that those port fees vary depending on the ship's size and the facilities and services used. And often it covers things like, so that fee has traditionally sort of covered things like waste disposal, security, also immigration or custom facilities. And they're generally unavoidable, she says. But she says passengers will actually never see that reflected in the fare when you go with Regent. So now to the most burning question after covering off this query about overnights and what it means. What is the actual cost of a cruise? So this can, of course, vary depending on the type of ship and the itinerary. But Adam says for Silversea, a world cruise typically ranges from around 134,000 to more than 568,000 per person. And that includes dining and the amenities on board, and also business class airfares and door-to-door transfers. And on Regent, the fare is starts at sort of a similar price, around 134,000, and goes up to 1.25 million per person for the most opulent Regent suite on a ship like Seven Seas Splendor. So you can see why Regent ships are just so highly sought after. And if you go on a slightly shorter journey, say the 126 night Miami, Florida to Rome voyage, you can take off about 10 grand. So it's 122,000 per person, or 1.23 million per guest. So that'll get you about 5 months on a ship.
I got to say, I want that door-to-door transfer because no one wants to wait for an Uber that doesn't turn up to get you there.
Or 1.23 million of it.
I know that's a substantial chunk of your life. You know, I have jumped in on world cruises. I haven't been on a full world cruise, but I have done a small sector on it, and they're just the people that are doing it. You know, they really have a different outlook on life, and I think that point of being able to stay in port is really interesting because, especially if you're going somewhere around the Med, you know, you're looking at some of the best hotels in the world. So if you're there, come off the ship and stay in one of the top hotels, one of those gorgeous ones on the Côte d'Azur or somewhere like that. I think it's a really amazing experience. So as we mentioned before, the demographic of those going on a cruise is changing. And Adam says that while its world cruises generally attract people over 50, they are also seeing a mix of younger travelers and multi-generational families. And Lisa also said the same thing, that traditionally they see people start cruising with Regent in their early 50s, but since the pandemic, the age of cruises is going down quite a lot. And there's a few factors in that. I mean, luxury cruisers people looking to go on a world cruise tend to be seasoned travelers who want the comfort of a high-end cruise ship, staying in the same suite and not having to pack and unpack. And also, as I mentioned before, that sense of community on the ship, as well as the amenities, is a huge draw card for an around the world cruise.
Okay, so I can hear you all asking, what does a world cruise look like and what actually is it? So apart from the obvious, which is that it goes around the world, here are some amazing examples. So Silversea's new 2027 world cruise, called the Three Oceans, on its ship Silver Dawn, visits 80 destinations, more than any voyages in its history. And you'll also be at sea for nearly 5 months, visiting 35 countries across 5 continents. God, it's just amazing, with 11 overnight. So there's those new sort of overnights coming in, and you can stay overnight in places like Honolulu and Cape Town and Bordeaux. So you can also visit 50 UNESCO heritage listed sites, so you can see the appeal, unpack your bag once, like Belle said before, and you get to visit 35 countries and multiple other towns and stay for almost 2 weeks overnight in some places.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's really different to sometimes some of those cruises are to like the Kon-Tiki of the sea where you're just bouncing in and out. But that's, that is really in-depth traveling. And Regent's 2027 World Cruise, World of Splendor, in January 2026, which you mentioned earlier, is 140 nights from Miami to New York. You visit 40 countries across 6 continents with 14 overnights and 486 shore excursions. I mean, you don't have to do every shore excursion, can I just point that out? because he'd be exhausted. And we haven't even started on the ship's amenities yet, like just enormous.
Yes, and that's the other thing, those excursions that are part of that fee that we mentioned earlier, are just remarkable. I mean, you're doing things like immersing in local cultures and things that you would never, have an opportunity to do otherwise. So they are truly remarkable. And this is another reason why people are turning to cruising. So, and it'll take us about another hour to go through all the amenities on board the ships for both of these cruise lines. But you can expect the same thing that, suites that you would on a 5-star plus resort. So, beautiful sprawling suites these days. They're not tiny little cabins, although you can have that too if you want. Spas on board with multiple treatment rooms, theatre productions, and multiple restaurants. And there's also artworks that rival some landside galleries, if not better. So you get my drift. And you can basically be walking through a shopping mall on a ship as long as you're not crossing the Drake Passage or any other major turbulent waterway, you can actually sort of forget that you're even on a ship. So that happened with me when I went to Norway last year, and they had a lovely little boutique area, a sort of shopping mall area, and if you're walking down there, it's so pretty and really lovely. And besides the tiny little sway, you would, may think you're actually in a shopping mall and not even on a ship itself.
I have to say, when I crossed the Drake Passage, it was not like that. I did notice that the grand piano was bolted to the floor, and everyone just sang and drank martinis as they crossed to Antarctica. But there was no shopping, and that's the difference between that and an expedition ship, really, isn't it? So there are so many reasons to cruise, and of course there are lots of options for the budget cruiser too. With a different experience, a bit like, Contiki versus Abercrombie and Kent or Captain's Choice, right? So you need to research the brand first. And I reckon we'll probably cover that off in an upcoming episode as well, won't we, Kirsty? We'll go in there because not everybody can do the time, like take 5 months out to cruise around the world. And also, every budget is different, and that I think that is the great thing about cruising. So we'll put a link to the world cruises and cruise lines that we mentioned in the show notes, and so you can dream the beautiful dream.
You're listening to The World Awaits. We'd love it if you could leave us a rating and review on your favourite podcast platform.
My guest this week is Jenny Gray, who is the Senior Product Manager of Intrepid Travel. She's based here in the head offices of Intrepid in Melbourne. And Jenny and I recently travelled together in Saudi Arabia, exploring its deserts and meeting the people in this intriguing location, which is one of the newest destinations for curious travellers. Our chat is timely as Intrepid has recently launched its new women's-only expedition to Saudi Arabia, which Jenny has played an integral part in creating. Jenny, welcome to The World Awaits. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting today, Belle.
Awesome. So look, first up, before we get into how we ended up in Saudi Arabia together, tell us, how did you get into the travel industry?
Not a very glamorous story. I fell into the travel industry very much accidentally and unintentionally. I had recently graduated with a degree in communications in Sydney, and I wanted to get into journalism actually, but I couldn't manage to get my foot in the door, and I was getting desperate. I was sick and tired of waitressing, and I was throwing my resume out to everybody and anybody who would read it. And I got an invitation to interview for a junior receptionist role for a ski wholesaler in Sydney. And at the interview, I was told that I was overqualified and definitely not a junior, but they had something else in mind for me. So I fell into travel, and specifically product management in travel, more than 20 years ago now.
Oh, amazing. I had no idea. Probably get better pay than you would as a journalist now, I reckon. So as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia is the newest destination for Intrepid Travel to run tours. And as a background for our listeners, Jenny and I spent 9 days travelling from the capital, Riyadh, up to Tabuk on the Jordanian border, and into my favourite oasis in the world, Al Ula, which is possibly, if you ever went there, would be your favourite oasis as well. And then we continued on to Medina, which is the second holiest city in Islam, and then down to the sea at Jeddah. It was an incredible experience, don't you think? We were on high-speed trains with pilgrims. We watched the desert come alive at sunrise. There were so many gorgeous things happening. What was your favourite experience in Saudi Arabia?
That's a really tricky question, Belle. I don't think I can narrow it down to just one. And for me, it wasn't a particular site or experience, but actually the people. the people I met and their personal stories really is what I've come back talking about, and they had a real impact on me. I learned a lot, and I came back with a real renewed reminder that travel has that unequivocal power to change you and challenge you and open your mind. Probably the greatest example of that on our trip was our leader, Fatma. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember Fatma.
She challenged a lot of my preconceptions as well. A young 30-year-old woman, Bedouin Saudi woman, recently divorcee, who likes climbing mountains and rock climbing and was the first to drive in her village. And, she spoke really candidly about Saudi. And to me, I was really fascinated by her story and her presence and her personality. And I just feel like, women like her deserve to be able to tell those stories. And I think that's what travel is all about, and particularly travel with Intrepid.
Yeah, I mean, many people, particularly Australians, have reservations about visiting Saudi Arabia. They cite the poor human rights record, but they always zone in on Saudi's treatment of women. So how does travelling there and travelling there with Intrepid, how does that address that concern?
Yeah, first of all, understandably that for some travellers, this is a decision. Travelling to Saudi is not an easy one. Intrepid, however, we fundamentally believe in the power of travel for positive change. And so this decision was not something that we made lightly either. And it's been 12 months in discussion, in research and development. First and foremost, it was really important for us that when we designed the itinerary, that we could find someone to operate it for us who understood our style of travel, shared our ethos, and, particularly around the fact that travel can be a force for good. And we wanted to work with a female-owned and operated DMC, and I wasn't even sure if that was going to be a possibility. But actually, we found an incredible female DMC. She's really the linchpin of this itinerary and its design as well. She's incredibly well-travelled. She's travelled to more than 70 countries. She's connected and knowledgeable, and she travels the way that our travellers travel, or Intrepid travels. And so it's because of her we've been able to curate some really unique local experience as well. And the trip provides travellers with a chance to see Saudi through the lens of local women, different perspectives, different experiences and stories to share as well. And like all of our women's expedition, that creates opportunities for female leaders and guides, as well as supporting women-owned and operated business all throughout the supply chain.
Yeah, that's quite amazing, isn't it? The preconceptions that we have of, particularly of Saudi women. Can I just add a little note here that a DMC is a destination management company for those without the jargon. That's okay. I'm like going lingo. So many people believe, the concept is that Saudi women are held back in society. Everybody quotes the idea about not being able, until recently, not being able to drive in the Middle East. But as we know, you'll find Saudis in all of the big capitals from London to New York. There is a part of society that is incredibly well-travelled and has those life experiences of life out of Saudi Arabia, because it is so different to somewhere like Australia. So when you're talking about this new women's only expedition, well, part of the reason why I wanted you to chat with you specifically is that you are the creator of these women only tours for Intrepid. So how did that come about? Was there an epiphany? Was there a light bulb moment when you thought we should do a women's only travel thing? How did it all happen, and where did it happen?
So back in 2018, we launched our first range of women's expeditions. We launched in Morocco, Iran, and Jordan were the first 3 destinations. And at that time, and since I started with Intrepid, I had always managed our trips in Africa and the Middle East. And it was something that came through in feedback from our travellers all the time. Women, all travellers really sort of wanting to have those authentic local experiences, but in a lot of cases in these destinations, they weren't getting those opportunities to interact with women on the ground because, as you know, different roles, different jobs. They just felt that there was this real lost opportunity to really understand what life is like for women in these destinations. And at that time, women-only trips was by no means a new concept. People were doing it, But they were doing it in a different way to where we've landed. And I happened to be in Iran on my second trip to Iran because I was there to train our incredible leaders. And at that time, most of our leaders were women. And I really got this incredible insight to what life was like for these women by spending a lot of time with them in their day-to-day lives, in my free time. And one of those experiences was actually heading to a female-only salon in Iran, and I would never have found it on my own. You know, we lifted back this huge curtain. We went down these steps into this, what looked like a dungeon building from the outside. And when we went inside, you know, the jackets came off, the hijabs, the headscarves came off. There was women. The conversation was lively. There was, you know, US pop music blaring on the radio, and women had purple hair and beautifully manicured red nails and cleavage and midriffs, and it's not what people expect. And, you know, I sat there getting my nails done and the conversation was lively and I couldn't understand a word of it. I obviously don't speak Farsi, but I could have been anywhere in the world, you know, and it's those incredible experiences when you travel that just remind you that we are more alike than we think or are led to believe sometimes, you know, the different narratives. And I just thought, wow, imagine if our travelers could experience this. Imagine if they could see for themselves what life is really like. And then I thought, well, that's not possible because this is a female-only space. And that's when sort of that idea started to percolate a lot more. And I think probably 6 months after that trip, we ended up launching our first range of trips because we really felt there was this incredible opportunity to have these experiences that are female-only, but few people get the opportunity to really get that deeper understanding of a destination.
And so by having on these trips, you're because I was actually on a women-only excursion with Intrepid in Turkey. Yeah, a little while ago. And so speaking from experience, you know, where our guide was female, our driver was female, which is I don't know, I actually don't know how you found her, but because there are so few women that run transport companies in Turkey. And yeah, this was Turkey's first female ambulance driver. She was amazing. And she was really, you know, really calm. If you've ever been on a Turkish road, I'd say put a woman behind the wheel there because she was calm but assertive and she wasn't doing any heroics and stuff like that. But that really underpins what this women-only travel is like, because your guides, your drivers, if you can find them, but also the hotels and the restaurants that you stay at as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, in all our Intrepid trips, we aim to support female-owned businesses through our supply chain, but with the women's expeditions, it's intrinsic to the design. So we actually, you know, look at each destination, say, is there a female-owned hotel or is there female drivers we can utilize? And in some destinations we use tuk-tuk drivers, you know. So it's a really great way to not just financially support these women, but also it builds these unique opportunities for women to share their stories, you know, those triumphs and challenges and the realities of what life is like for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the legal situation for many women is so different. Like in Turkey, I was at a sensational bakery, and the kitchen is run by women. It's owned by a woman, and there are women working in the kitchens. But she was saying so many women don't start working in Turkey until after they're divorced. So she said, so everyone comes in, and it's like, I think there was a bit of therapy going on in the kitchen as well. But it was like amazing food. But then you think, oh, that, you know, is that really fair that you have to be in that position before you can start to work? So it does bring a lot of those questions out about how the country runs, because I'd travelled for years in Turkey and it had always been a very male-facing country to travel in. You know, everybody that you speak to in the markets, in the tours, everywhere, you just felt that there was an absence of that other voice. Yeah, which is really interesting. So how many destinations now does Intrepid run women-only expeditions?
We now have, I have to count, we've recently just launched Saudi. So we have Morocco and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Turkey. We have India, Nepal and Pakistan.
Fantastic. And but I imagine that Saudi has taken longer to develop. Were there particular challenges in creating this expedition in Saudi Arabia compared to the others?
Yes and no. I mean, first and foremost, we needed to be sure that we could do it in a way that was true to Intrepid's ethos and our style of travel. And you've traveled there twice before. That market's been largely pegged towards luxury, and that is not Intrepid. And even a lot of the competitors and the offerings now are very stock standard. Tourism is very much in its infancy. So concepts of, go inside a local's home to have a meal and understand what life is like for them is still really bizarre to a lot of people. So those real unique experiences, which are the hallmark of Intrepid, are quite foreign still. So that was one of the challenges, and working with Sarah, our local operator, really helped us too, because she's so incredibly connected. We have a cooking class with a local female chef, and it's in a farm setting, and we go inside a women-only salon in Hale. So we have these incredibly curated experiences. And so there was a lot of back and forth to really ensure that we could design something that was exactly what we wanted it to be. And then all of the classic challenges of a new destination. We have a lot of due diligence that we do when we're working with anyone new and anywhere new. So just ensuring that we did have the right people on the ground to operate it for us, and that we've done the work as well to ensure that we can get it off the ground safely. And
And ticking those boxes that Intrepid's known for, like having ethical animal interactions, being aware of your carbon footprint and things like that. That's all rolled into the one trip, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that was a challenge as well. We're trying really hard to reduce our carbon impact by not including internal flights on our destinations, on the trips on ground, unless absolutely required. And in addition to that, we've actually done a big review of trips to remove internal flights where we can replace it with a suitable land-ground transfer. So you also know how long those distances, how huge Saudi is. We wanted to be able to create an itinerary that didn't have any flights in it as well. So that took some time to work through, make sure that we've got a good pace to the itinerary, that people have time to explore in their own time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were on the bullet train traveling from Medina to Jeddah, which then goes to Mecca as well, and it's a pilgrim route. So
amazing.
Yeah, people are cloaked in their white pilgrim robes, and it's a really quite an amazing experience. This was an old route that people would do by foot, by camel, with donkeys, and now you do it by bullet train. And Saudi has been talking a lot about the high speed network that it is creating around the country to address that, and also not. I think one of the really interesting things about it is that, Saudi sells itself as a place of absolute luxury. And that's, what you were referring to when so much of the tourism that they're encouraging there is go to the most glamorous Maldives-like resort, or, go to a ski resort in the middle of the Middle East or something. But not all Saudis are wealthy, and not all people who live in Saudi. There are a lot of people coming from Yemen working there, and all around the Levant living in Saudi. And I thought that was seeing, the realistic snapshot of what a country looks like was really fascinating.
Yes, I always talk about the real all ends of the spectrum, even on the trip that we did, from those, big shiny cities to the stretches of road where there's nearly nothing in between and barely a toilet to stop at. And the landscapes But I agree with that. In particular, going to Medina and that pilgrimage journey, I think, is a real privilege for travellers to have access to that. Just what an incredible, special experience.
Well, which you couldn't have had until Saudi started opening up just before COVID. I mean, the mosques in the cities in Medina and Mecca, which are the two most revered, most revered in Islam, are still not open to non-Muslims. But you can actually visit Medina, the city. In fact, we went up to one of the hotels right over the Prophet's Mosque, so you could actually look into it. We were up sky high. Remember, we had that massive banquet looking over the mosque. But just seeing the people streaming out of the mosque on Friday after Friday prayers, and they stopped the traffic. Thousands of people pouring through the streets. I thought that just that incredible wealth of humanity, and people were from all over the world. remember we were meeting Americans and then, Central Africans, people from from Northern Europe, from the US. And then this bunch of Australian women kind of standing there, just in this incredible wave of humanity. But going back to the idea of women's only tours, they've been very successful for Intrepid, haven't they? Why do you think they're so popular?
It's interesting. Obviously we know that there is, and even anecdotally, that there is a huge trend and a continually growing trend for women's only travel. And a lot of competitors in this space are basically taking a stock standard itinerary and labeling it as a women-only departure. You want to hike this mountain, do it with other like-minded women. For us, we actually take it much deeper than that. We're not excluding men for the sake of it. It's because we want to tap into these really unique and special female-owned experiences, discussions that you might not have access to due to cultural or religious reasons, and get a really deeper understanding of women in this destination as well. And we're seeing a huge amount of interest that continues to grow. In 2023, we had an increase of 165% in travellers, and we're seeing women from all across the globe of all ages, but a particularly high growth in women who are 45 plus. A high percentage of these women are travelling on their own, so they might be married or with partners, but they're choosing to travel on their own, and they're just looking to explore off the beaten destinations in the comfort and safety of other like-minded women. But on top of that, in the feedback, we're getting a really strong sense that those really special opportunities to connect with local women is equally important to them.
Yeah, incredible. So where do you see the growth in these tours? Do you think Saudi is really, it's almost the last outpost, isn't it? Are you still exploring other destinations for women only travel?
We're always exploring, Belle. That's what we do.
Yeah. That was a very diplomatic answer, I've got to say.
Traditionally we've seen huge interest and growth in the Middle East, and up until probably 12 months ago, Jordan, Morocco, and when we were still selling Iran, obviously that's been discontinued currently, unfortunately, they were our top-selling destinations. However, for different reasons, probably largely due to the conflict, there's been a real shift, and we're seeing a huge rise in India, Nepal, and Pakistan now. And Saudi has surprised us. We weren't sure if this was a destination that people would need to take some time to think about, but we saw bookings within 24 hours of this trip being on sale, and we'd hit, a third of our capacity was full for the 24-25 season within just over 2 weeks. So it's been really interesting. Perhaps people have been thinking about this for a while. We've had feedback and comments on social media that people were not comfortable traveling there previously, but now that there's an opportunity to travel in this particular way where the focus has been put on women, that they're really interested. So,
yeah, amazing. Well, I think too that Intrepid is really known for examining its own self and its own way of travelling, and that if somebody has had reservations about the way that women are treated in Saudi Arabia, if they go with Intrepid, then they're resolving that, or it's allowing them to really to explore that question, because if it remains closed, nobody will ever know. I think that's always been my approach to certain places that I've travelled, to witness it. So incredible! I cannot wait to see the first. When does the first trip, women only trip, depart for Saudi?
The end of November this year, so not too far.
And it's fully booked?
Not yet, but close to, actually.
And you've got 6 departures, I think, haven't you? Yeah, because then you're going in November. That takes you over the cooler months, which is actually the peak for Middle Eastern travel as well, because nobody wants to be 50 degrees standing at a desert, which is in Saudi. No. So now to my final question, which is the question we ask all our guests, and I know you're going to have so many of them, and it's really hard to narrow it down. What is your most bizarre travel experience?
I've been thinking about this, and it's had me stumped, Belle. I think the word bizarre is what's if I'm finding challenging. And where I landed was probably when I was traveling for work in North America, and my husband's Brazilian. He was not my husband at that time, but we were meeting up in Central America to do an Intrepid trip, and we were actually meeting up in Guatemala. Not right. I had arranged all of his bookings because, you know, there's always that one person in a relationship that does all of the organizing and the other person who just turns up. So my husband's the guy who turns up, bless him, and he was in Brazil at the time. So I was in New York and I got a frantic call from my husband. I was trying to piece together what he was saying to me. And he basically told me that, in a nutshell, he had got off the plane in the wrong country and didn't realize it until his plane had already left. So this does happen.
Oh,
On his ticket, he did have a refueling stop in Panama, but what he didn't have on his ticket was an additional stop in Costa Rica. And, you know, this could have partly been fault of the airline, that he fell asleep on the plane and he woke up and he knew that he'd already stopped once. And so he woke up in a panic and grabbed his things and jumped off the plane after the first stop in the next stop, assuming that he was in destination. But nobody checked his final destination on the way out or his boarding passes. And he, bless him, was taking photos of the welcome to Costa Rica signs and did not grasp that that was not his destination or final destination. And he got into the customs area. They were asking him where he was staying. And so he was describing the name of the hotel in Antigua, in Guatemala. And he's like, "You're in Costa Rica." Unfortunately, I had to manage that bizarre situation for him. And I asked him to put me on to the airline crew because his bag was checked all the way through and it had not been taken off the flight either, which I know is not regulation. So managed to get him on the next flight. And he did tell me that he had a 7-hour delay and he might go out and explore the city. And I said, "You are not going anywhere. Go to the gate and sit down and wait until your flight." But I mean, I have to say that he went on to propose to me at the end of this trip in Mexico, where he dropped my grandmother's ring down a drain and had to get 3 people to help him collect it. He'd organised an incredible dinner at the end of a little pier over the water, and a almost hurricane-like storm came through and blew the champagne stand and my chair into the ocean. It was pouring with rain out of nowhere. Our lobster was soggy, and then we ended up getting drunk on tequila in the restaurant. So it's kind of a really good example of what our life is like, I'd say. Full of surprises, never to plan, but always wonderful.
I've been trying not to laugh all the way through it. That's incredible. What a great meeting story. Well, you must be a fantastic organizer to have hauled him out of that one. But I reckon, yeah, there but for the grace of God go I. When you were describing him getting up, like waking up and jumping out of the plane, I can totally see myself doing that. And they do become milk runs through Central America, don't they? Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't entirely his fault, but he was upset because he left his Havaianas on the flight as well. I was like, I think that's the least of your concerns as you arrive in Guatemala with no bag, no shoes, and try to explain to immigration that you are here to meet your Australian girlfriend. This young Brazilian man, you can imagine, he had some interrogating.
Oh, I can imagine. What a fantastic story. That is so good. Jenny, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and finally talking about Saudi Arabia with you and Women Only Travel with Intrepid. Thanks so much for joining us. I've loved every minute of it.
Thank you, Belle. It's been a complete pleasure, as always, chatting with you.
That was Jenny Gray of Intrepid Travel, and you can find more about Intrepid's women-only expeditions around the world at intrepid.com. Our tip this week is about how to learn more about the languages spoken in Australia. So we've just come out of Reconciliation Week, which is a time for all Australians to learn about our shared histories and cultures. And it's headed up by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous leaders, and it's dedicated to reconciliation. And Reconciliation Week coincides with the release of a new picture book, Walking the Rock Country in Kakadu, Karare kan jenge kariboke nan kun warade warade. It is written in English and Kunjame, which is one of the 11 Bininj Kunwok languages of Kakadu and Western Arnhem Land. And out of respect, I wanted to say the full title of the book,
The book was written by Diane Lucas and Ben Tyler with illustrations by Emma Long and came out on Tuesday. And it describes a walk through the rock country of Kakadu, talking about the land and the animals you'll see. And it gives their names in Ben's first language. And at the back, you can find a glossary of all the words that have been used.
I met Ben at a genuinely spectacular full moon feast in Kakadu National Park. And you can find out more about the Dird or full moon dinners and travelling in Kakadu through Ben's business, kakadukitchen.com.au. And for more about the Binjan languages in West Arnhem Land, visit namjed.com, which is NJAMED.com, and we'll put those in the show notes. And I also interviewed Ben for our podcast last year. So if you want to listen to him talking about growing up in Gagaju or Kakadu, the crocodiles, I mean, what he's talking, you grow up around crocodiles, it's incredible. Go back to episode 17 of the World Awaits podcast. And you can also grab a copy of his book, Walking in Rock Country in Kakadu, which is published by Allen and Unwin, and we'll put that link in the show notes.
Next week, I'm talking to Elliot Stein, who's been travelling the globe to uncover the world's rarest and most remarkable cultural traditions and profile the last people keeping them alive. He's documented them in his new book called Custodians of Wonder. We chat about his incredible journeys around the world and where you can go to see some of the world's dying cultural traditions before it's too late.
And we'd love it if you could give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Click onto our profile, scroll down to the bottom to ratings and reviews, and hit those 5 stars, baby, if you want to. And if you're on Spotify, go to our main page and click the 3 dots underneath our photo. That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods. And where can people find you, Kirsty?
I'm at Kirsty Writes on Instagram. That's KIRSTIE Writes, WRITES. And where can people find you, Belle?
You can find me at globalsalsa.com or on Insta at global_salsa.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.